The afternoon sun hung low over the busy city street, casting long shadows across the sidewalk as people hurried past, lost in their own lives. Vendors shouted about fresh fruit, taxis honked impatiently, and the distant boom of traffic filled the air. In the middle of this ordinary chaos walked an elderly woman with calm dignity. Her hair was streaked with gray, tied neatly behind her head, and she carried a small grocery bag in one hand. Though her steps were slow, there was quiet strength in the way she moved. People who knew her often said she had the heart of a fighter, a woman who had endured hardship yet never allowed bitterness to settle in her soul. But that afternoon, fate was about to place her in the middle of a moment that would shake the entire street. A police car suddenly screeched to a halt near the curb. The door swung open, and an officer stepped out with an irritated look on his face. He had the kind of attitude that made people uncomfortable before he even spoke. His voice cut sharply through the air as he barked at a group of teenagers nearby. The crowd grew quiet. People glanced nervously at each other and slowly moved away, not wanting trouble. Unfortunately, the elderly woman happened to pass directly beside the scene. The officer turned toward her with an expression filled with unnecessary hostility. He accused her of interfering, even though she had said nothing. The woman tried to explain calmly that she was only walking home, her voice soft but steady. Yet the officer wasn't interested in listening. His frustration, mixed with prejudice and arrogance, began to show in every movement he made. A few people nearby started recording with their phones. They sensed something was wrong. The officer stepped closer, raising his voice, demanding that the woman move faster and stop pretending to be innocent. The words themselves were cruel, but the tone behind them carried something darker, an ugly sense of power. The woman attempted to step aside and continue walking, hoping to avoid conflict. But then it happened. In a sudden burst of anger, the officer shoved her violently. The grocery bag fell to the ground. Apples rolled across the pavement. The woman staggered, trying to keep her balance, but the force of the shove was too strong. Gas erupted from the small crowd gathering nearby. One young man shouted that the officer had gone too far. A woman covered her mouth in shock. The elderly woman struggled to stand straight again, her eyes filled with pain, not only from the shove but from the humiliation of being treated that way in front of strangers. What the officer didn't realize was that the quiet woman he had just attacked was not just anyone. She was the mother of a man the world knew very well. Miles away, inside a modest gym filled with the rhythmic sound of punching bags and skipping ropes, a powerful figure trained with relentless focus. Sweat glistened under the harsh lights as gloves slammed against leather again and again with explosive force. The fighter moved like a storm, fast, precise, unstoppable. His phone buzzed on a nearby bench. At first, he ignored it. Training demanded discipline, but the buzzing continued. Finally, he walked over, breathing heavily, and glanced at the screen. A message, then another, and another. Each one carried the same shocking words: "Your mother, something happened." Attached to the messages was a short video clip. He pressed play. The gym seemed to fall silent around him as he watched the footage. The scene unfolded clearly: the officer shouting, the shove, the apples rolling across the pavement, his mother struggling to stand. For a moment, the fighter said nothing. But the air around him changed. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. Anyone who had ever seen him in the ring knew that look. The gym trainer noticed it too. "What happened?" the trainer asked quietly. The fighter slowly lowered the phone. "They touched my mother." His voice was calm, but the calm carried the weight of thunder waiting to strike. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and walked toward the exit. Outside, the city buzzed with the same normal energy as always. But somewhere across those streets, a man who had abused his power had no idea that the storm he had just created was about to arrive. And when it did, the entire world would be watching. Before we continue this intense story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next chapter reveals what happens when a son refuses to stay silent in the face of injustice. By the time evening approached, the video had spread across the internet like wildfire. Thousands of people had already seen the shocking moment when the officer shoved the elderly woman to the ground. Comments flooded social media, many expressing anger and disbelief. Some demanded justice, others called for an investigation. But one person wasn't interested in waiting for committees or official statements. Inside a moving car cutting through traffic, the fighter sat silently in the back seat. The driver kept glancing nervously in the mirror. He knew the man he was driving wasn't just any passenger. The fighter's reputation was legendary. His presence alone could make arenas tremble. Yet at that moment, the fighter wasn't thinking about fame, titles, or crowds. He was thinking about his mother. He remembered the sacrifices she had made when he was young. The nights she stayed strong even when life was difficult. The way she had taught him that respect mattered more than anything. And now someone had humiliated her in the street. The car stopped near the same block where the incident had happened earlier. A small crowd had gathered again. Some people were still talking about the event, pointing at the exact spot where the groceries had spilled across the pavement. When the fighter stepped out of the car, whispers rippled through the crowd. People recognized him instantly. Phones came out again. The officer who had caused the earlier incident was still nearby, speaking casually with another officer as if nothing had happened. He hadn't noticed the approaching figure yet. But the crowd had. Someone murmured, "He's here." Another voice whispered, "Oh no." The officer finally turned. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face as he recognized the powerful man walking toward him. The fighter moved slowly but with absolute purpose, his eyes locked on the officer. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. "You remember her?" the fighter asked quietly. The officer tried to maintain authority, straightening his posture. "If you're trying to cause trouble, you should leave," he said stiffly. The fighter's voice remained controlled. "The woman you pushed today, that was my mother." A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the officer's face. But pride, and fear of looking weak, pushed him to respond defensively. He started raising his voice, claiming he had done nothing wrong. That was the moment the fighter stepped closer. Not with rage, not with chaos, but with the calm presence of someone who had spent his entire life mastering discipline. "You hurt someone who never hurt you," he said. The officer attempted to grab his radio, perhaps realizing the situation had grown far beyond his control. But the fighter's reflexes were faster. In one swift motion, his fist moved. The punch wasn't wild or uncontrolled, it was precise, the kind delivered by someone who had trained for decades. The officer stumbled backward, collapsing onto the pavement in stunned silence. Gas erupted around the street. The fighter didn't attack again. Instead, he stepped back. His message had already been delivered. Other officers rushed forward, shocked by what had just happened. But the fighter raised his hands calmly, showing he had no intention of continuing the fight. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said fiercely. "But nobody gets to treat my mother, or anyone's mother, like that." The crowd began clapping. Some people even cheered, not because they loved violence, but because they had witnessed someone stand up against injustice. Within minutes, more police cars arrived. The situation became tense, but the story had already reached millions online. Cameras were everywhere, and suddenly the narrative had changed. Now the question wasn't just about the punch. It was about the officer's actions earlier that day. Investigations would follow, reports would be written, the truth would spread even further. But one thing was already clear to everyone who had watched the scene unfold. Respect matters. Power must never be abused. And sometimes it only takes one moment of courage to remind the world of that truth. As the fighter finally walked back toward the waiting car, the crowd parted quietly, watching him with a mixture of awe and respect. Far away, his mother would later hear the full story. And though she would shake her head at her son's dramatic response, she would also understand something deeper. He had defended not just her dignity, but the dignity of many others. If you enjoyed this powerful story of courage and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because many more emotional and unforgettable stories are coming soon.